Welcome to another group think session with two diehard Rush fans.
First introduction of the man, the myth, the legend, rest in peace. Thank God he was a permanent selection.
Both permanent waves, Rush.
Oh, especially on the Rush Reddit or other Rush fans I've ever talked to, I don't really see too many people talking about the earlier stuff. They kind of pretend like, oh yeah, that's Rush. I think this one, being the introduction of the permanent trio, should be talked about a little bit more.
I think that's mostly because they hadn't really found their sound yet. Right now, they were still very Zeppelin-like on a lot of the earlier stuff, and even on some of the stuff here, but you can tell this was the benchmark where they really started to find their own personal sound.
Yeah, and it's really extraordinary to see the difference in chemistry.
Rush. Yes.
Even one new member can be.
And speaking of Neil, a lot of the older drummers that I've talked to actually prefer this album drum tone-wise over all the other ones, maybe just because of the vintage sound that a 70s style production gives you, and also the kit that he used, which, what did it sell for, 80,000? Without further, Bovine Excrement, Anthem. What a song to start Neil's career. Usually drums are the last thing that I notice because it's the instrument that I probably have the least experience with. Neil is hard to ignore with the intricate patterns and the fills that start off in the first seconds of his Rush career. Alex and Geddy join him too on their goal of caving in the skulls of the listener with quick runs as Alex later shifts to his big roaring chords that he's so famous for.
And especially the way that Geddy shreds his vocals.
Absolutely, and this is around the time that Geddy was getting a lot of flack for his vocal style, but can you really hear anyone else singing the song? Except for Robert Plant would actually be pretty cool. Everything you're hearing, you can tell is coming with all they got, and it's truly amazing how it all comes together so neatly and forms such an amazing masterpiece. So I give this one an 8.5.
Ooh. Some of the best work from the duo, I gave it an 8.
This one carries over much of the same feel, maybe slightly more dialed back, and even though it definitely still has that Zeppelin vibe, you can start to hear the beginnings of some of the Rush isms, like Alex's chords that utilize as much string real estate as possible, and Geddy flying on bass even more so than Anthem.
It's not a bad song, but I feel like it's not the best I can.
Yes. No, I actually 100% agree. This is what I was texting you about earlier. This is not one of my top picks. It sounds like something that could have made the first album, but still an enjoyable listen. I give it a 7.
6.5.
One of Neil's signatures was his tasteful use of the bells on both the hi-hat and the ride cymbal. It gives the song another dimension, which he leads us into with this one.
Again, this one, not a terrible song, but it suffers from a little bit of the formula syndrome.
Yeah, a little bit formulaic. Like the last track, there's not much to latch onto instrumentally, as Alex looping the sliding chord for most of it, and Geddy pretty much following suit. It's Neil's pounding, though, that keeps me engaged for most of the listen, with fills that change every time and how he's able to shift the whole song in different directions from underneath with his pattern changes. So I give this one a 7.
6.5.
And the Snow Dog. Everyone nuts all over the song on the Reddit.
I don't know why. It's because it was the first time the three of them tried to write like a long epic. Just like, oh, By-Tor the Snow Dog. I'm like, but just listen to Camera Eye or like Hemispheres or like 2112.
But they demonstrate their sheer creativity and will to change things up by releasing a wild boar into the studio who promptly tries to play the guitar.
Besides the instrumental breaks being well placed, they just kind of feel like a jam session where they kind of just walked in and were like playing some chords with that wild boar, and they were like, yeah, this is good. We'll just put it on there. That's what's interesting to me about this song, is it shows the growing pains or the foundation of their epics that we know and love today because of songs like this. I would like to hear more people maybe in the comments, without ripping my head off, as to what makes this song stand out so much.
But the second half transition was extremely welcomed, especially how well all of them are able to create such a great ambience with perfect timing and velocity. Neil's flange roll takes us into a very refreshing section where the song kicks into a very Hendrix-like bluesy mood. The section also features one of my favorite solos from Alex on this album. Definitely a stronger song than the last two, especially in the second half, so I give it a 7.5.
I give it a 7.
You hear the first D chord and you instantly know what song it is, as we demonstrated. Even though everyone always talks about the guitar, and especially when you hear Fly By Night, I feel like Geddy was the biggest standout of them all, keeping the same general rhythm but also adding in different accents and arrangements to help his part stay fresh. One of those rare songs where it's definitely a favorite among the cavemen, but even the prog elitist Wojaks have to bow to this one.
That's a good way. That's a good way to put it. They were able to accomplish the caveman prog unity. The Great War was ended, and they were able to come together like that South Park scene with the Van Halen.
Super Super brief song, but it made a long-lasting impact. One done earlier in their career, which holds up even against all the classics that they put out since. So I give this one an 8.5.
Some of their best work I've heard, 8.5.
They're able to bring hard rock energy without an electric guitar for most of the song, and just in case you need a reminder, these are only 3 guys. Did you know that? Another super quick one, but made a big impression on me, so I give it an 8.
Solid addition, I give it a 7.
More of a polarizing one, but one you have to respect. They go super detail-oriented with the focus obviously on the acoustic, but the swelled electric notes add such essential accents. Geddy being panned hard to the left with a softer tone also adds to the mood nicely. It almost gives kind of like a Jim Croce kind of time in a bottle vibe.
I believe that it accomplishes its goal of what it's going for. The second to last song is usually their more laid-back song like Tears or Different Strings. It's not one of my personal favorites. There's not too much going on, but definitely not hating on it.
I actually really love when they go soft, just like you were talking about. Even bands that I really like that have tried to do the same thing just always fall flat when they try to do like the softer, more acoustic type stuff. I'm not really into all the mythology shit with like the Lord of the Rings and all that bullshit, but Neil's lyrical structure and beautiful words are enough to make you shed a tear regardless. I give it an 8.
I give it a 6.5.
Beautiful chorus effect on the acoustic and a great way to transition to Rivendell. And the THX transition barely prepares you to get knocked on your ass going into the harder section.
Some of the best solo work I've heard from Alex on this album.
Other than Neil doing his thing again, there's not much to latch onto, but it's a strong closer that really summarizes the album nicely. I give it a 7.
I agree, it does suffer a little bit from a formulaic approach, but great way to end it, and it continues the flow of the album, so I give it a 7.
Overall, while it was a great group effort, I think Neil dominated this entire record, sometimes even carrying songs like Beneath, Between, Behind, Best I Can, and the beginning of By-Tor. Looking back at some of our videos, I often think back and think that, oh, we could have touched on the drums a little bit more, especially when we were doing a lot of the big drummers like Mike Portnoy or, of course, Neil. The performance was so insane on this one, Helen Keller couldn't have ignored Neil on this one. It's also gifted us some Rush classics like the title track, Anthem, and Rivendell. And it's just an enjoyable listen by itself, so I give it an 8.
Great shine-throughs as well as ones that may not shine through that I still revisit. I give this one a 7.